on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
We want to focus so much on graduation rates or so much on college going rates or career readiness. And it's next to impossible to think that we're going to make any headway if we're just focused on those outcomes without going back to the early stages.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at iapssin.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Coopman.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Coopman, Executive Director of the IAPSS. Our weekly show features Indiana education innovators from all over our great state discussing trending topics in the public education space and bringing in a variety of Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. This show is brought to you by our IPSS team and produced by my friends at Site Strategic and Edge Media Studios. We're always expected to hear from experienced and passionate educators, so let's get started with today's conversation.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guest is Dr. Brandi Oliver, Associate Professor in the Butler School of Education for School Counseling. Dr. Oliver has served as President of the Indiana School Counselors Association and has served on numerous national boards and Indiana boards of school counseling and is in demand as a speaker and as a consultant throughout the country and throughout Indiana as it relates to school counseling and bullying education. So having the ability to look at education from various lenses is a tremendous asset that we have to be speaking with her today. So let's find out how she views the issues in Indiana public schools. Welcome, Dr. Oliver. We're thrilled to have you with us on today's program. So tell us a little bit about yourself and the school counseling program at Butler University.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. Yes, I have had the great fortune of teaching at Butler and teaching at the graduate program at Butler University. We are a school counseling program only. So what that means is some other school counseling or other counseling programs have mental health counseling programs and school counseling programs, maybe family marriage programs. But Butler has been unique because we only train school counseling program or school counselors. So we bring in a cohort of 24 students every year, and that cohort matriculates through the program. We offer a fast track program that they complete in 2 years or a traditional track program where it's a 3-year program. We have a wide variety of students that I guess traditionally, I'm a graduate of the program, so I'm a little, connected to Butler's program, but have been school teachers. We've had attorneys go through the program. We have a really unique skill set of students that enter our program. But I would say in the last 5 years, our students are getting younger. So we have students that are just coming out of the undergraduate program, and then we have students that are in their 50s. So our cohorts range greatly in their age, in their experiences. So I think that brings a really unique exposure of who our students are. So that's a little bit about Butler's program. We are very excited. They have a lot of unique experiences while they're in our program as far as getting out into the schools. We have some unique partnerships with our Dream Alive, where they get to work with students in an after-school program. We are very proud of our partnership with Brooks Place, which is for grieving students. So they have unique training experience where they are trained as grief group facilitators, and then they work 6 months as grief group facilitators at Brooks Place. So that's, I think, a really unique training opportunity for our students. So that's a little bit about just Butler's program, but it is something that we are very excited about growing our program, and I think a unique opportunity we are facing right now is between now and 2019, our program will go from 48 graduate credit hours to 60 graduate credit hours due to our accreditation standards. That's what we're moving towards.
Now, does that have anything to do with what they refer to as the gold standard?
No, we are moving to 60 graduate credits really to stay in alliance to our accrediting body. So any university program that is KCREP accredited is going to be required to move to 60 graduate credit hours by 2020. So there's, I think, currently 6 programs in our state that are KCREP accredited, and so I believe all of our programs are going to be moving to 60 graduate credit hours.
Now, and I don't know this, obviously I've not been through the school counseling program.
Sure.
So do school counselors go through internships much like a teacher would go through a student teaching program?
So our program has we call it a practicum, which is a 100-hour field-based experience, and then we have 600 hours of internship. So the way our traditional program, our third year is all internship. So basically they have 2 full semesters. Most of our students are in schools at least 3 days a week, if not more. It's very similar to student teaching. Some of our students that do that fast track program, their whole second semester with us, it's Monday through Friday, so it's full time in a school. So yeah, very, very similar to student teaching experience. They have to have a site supervisor that's a licensed school counselor with a minimum of 2 years experience, providing that supervision. We're a faculty supervisor that is providing that supervision experience as a course. And so we have a lot of great field experience where they're getting that real experience out in the field. I think that is, every program has to have that opportunity for their students, but I think what's wonderful is we have so many grads out in the program that we were able to place many of our students with graduates of the program, so they know the expectations. And our students are a little bit unique as they have to videotape their sessions while they're out in their internship hours.
Okay.
So that is, I guess, sometimes a little bit of a challenge. They don't have to necessarily have their students on the tape, but they have to have at least their selves on the tape. Sure. And we find that we are unique. We're one of the only programs that requires that videotape, but we find that to be very beneficial to provide that supervision. Other programs require more of a case consultation, so they would come and talk about the students that they're seeing, which is still providing some good supervision, but when you have that video, you're able to really break down what's happening and to provide that really great, I think, opportunity to say, this is really what I'm hearing, this is what I'm seeing, why don't you try this? And so we require, both in practicum and internship, those videotaped counseling sessions or group counseling, or even if they wanted to videotape their teaching lessons in the classroom.
So in addition to teaching, do you also do field supervision?
Yes.
How do you find time to teach and prepare for your classes and do field supervision? And if you're doing videotaping critiques, that sounds like a lot to me.
Yes, so that's part of our caseload. So tonight when I get back, I have internship where I will be meeting with my interns. And so it's a course that they come, and then so many students will show videotapes tonight, and we'll talk as a group and provide that feedback via videotape. And then we do so many site visits per semester. And then that we also make sure that their site supervisors know that we are accessible, because we all know that it's best to get that feedback before we do that site visit. I'd rather try to problem solve before showing up at a site and hearing that there's a problem. Yeah. So trying to check in and make sure that site supervisors know that they need to contact us if there's ever a concern before we show up. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's extensive. I can appreciate why the Butler program is so exalted because of the amount of time that they spend, as well as the quality of the instruction that you provide. So I know that the Butler grads that are out there in the field are doing a great job serving the needs of kids and families. So really appreciate that. Thank you for all the effort that you put into that.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that it's been an interesting semester this year. 3 of my 6 interns are hired currently as school counselors. So it's been an interesting semester to have students working full-time as school counselors in their internships. So I think that really speaks loudly for their preparedness, that they were already hired as interns. So right. Yeah, they're doing some great work. And I also think it shows a need, that we had a need to have school counselors, that principals were willing to hire interns. And so I think that was a great year and a great learning experience.
Well, we know that primarily because of budget restraints or constraints, that school counselors unfortunately have way too much to do and not enough time, and there's just not enough of there probably are enough of them as graduates, but as far as schools hiring them and using them, that probably is a real need. Is there something that you as a professor focus on with your students as it relates to school counseling?
Yes, I think that that's what we often hear is a little bit of a discrepancy. So the way we train, and then sometimes when they're out in the field, there's a little bit of a mismatch. And I'm not sure that they don't always like our alums to hear the answer. We're not going to change the way we train because we're going to train for best practice, and so we're going to keep training them to be leaders and advocates for change.
All right.
So what we train and what we believe is to be best is to develop comprehensive school counseling programs. And we want them to be trained to use data to drive their practice. And we think that it's best to have school counselors using evidence-based programs to show that their work is truly making a difference in students' lives. And unfortunately, that we do know the counselors are often being used to do test administration or lunch supervision. And I understand that sometimes that those duties are necessary, and I don't know that I'm sitting here saying that they shouldn't do some lunch supervision or a bus duty. I think that it's about being a team player within reason. However, I also think that as a school counselor, you have to be able to demonstrate your time is valuable, and so we would say advocate, start small. Show where your student needs are. So do a needs assessment, and you need to know the needs of your school. And then if you are going to implement a group, you're going to run a small group, and then you show that the data and the evidence-based program that you implement, that you made change. And so maybe you're going to look at your behavior referrals, and you're going to show that the outcomes of this group decrease behavior referrals, or you're going to look at the grades. But you need to be able to demonstrate that the time that you spent doing that made an impact on your students.
Sure.
And I think that takes the school counselor to know how to do that. And I think that that's what we're really trying to do is show that our school counselors are equipped with those skills. But you need to be a team player. You need to be able to collaborate with your teachers to be able to do that, with your school principal. And also look at equity and access issues. I think that that's another key area that we're always discussing with our school counselors. So it's a dance. It really is.
Yeah.
But I think that they know going out, it's going to be difficult. But I hope that we're equipping them with both the skills and the knowledge to be able to start small. You're not going to be able to change something quickly, but to know how to look at the data. And really, we keep talking about these evidence-based programs. So really to know how to choose the right evidence-based program, implement this change, and then to be able to show that your program made a difference.
Right.
And you have to share that. I think sometimes, for some reason, we draw these people into our profession that are really humble, and they don't like to share when they've made these changes and this impact. But we need to be able to really advocate and to go and share with your school principal or your school board that the work that you did really did make a difference in the lives of the sixth grade students or in this small group of students. And it was you as a school counselor that did that.
Well, I think many of us believe that if we do more with our younger students, there are going to be better outcomes when they reach middle school and high school. But schools can't afford elementary counselors. There's a lot of schools that have difficulty in even having middle school counselors. And then the focus in high school turns to college and career ready and getting kids focused on getting a job, getting into college, or the military. So how do we make up for those discrepancies?
It's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the difficult, and we've had a lot of conversations around, we want to focus so much on graduation rates or so much on college going rates or career readiness. And it's next to impossible to think that we're going to make any headway if we're just focused on those outcomes without going back to the early stages. And I think that that's where we have to invest in, preschool and kindergarten and making sure that we are, providing the best supports early on throughout. So not just, at one stage, but it needs to be continuous. And I think that that's where the Lilly Foundation, provided some really great resources and funding last fall and spring for schools. And it was really powerful to watch schools come together and teams come together and really do a deep dive into the needs of their schools. And I think that it was, I can't thank Lily enough for just providing a great flashlight and spotlight on school counseling. I think that they were able to help school counselors feel empowered to talk and to, what is it that we're trained to do, and to talk about school counseling. And I think for once we were able to see, some movement around the profession, and to think about it does take, K-12 systems sitting down and mapping. So we were talking about curriculum mapping, and we have, school counseling competencies. We don't call them standards, but it was, I sat with a pretty large school corporation, and all the counselors in the building looked at the competencies and how would we, expect kindergarten students, it's K2, and then what would we want our K2 students to learn? And then they would map it for 3-5. We don't do that. We curriculum map with our teachers,
Sure.
But we don't have our school counselors ever sit down and think about how do we want our K-12, school counselors to think about their competencies.
Right.
So I think that the Lilly Grant was wonderful. I think it helped bring people together, and not just school counselors, but it had administrators and superintendents and teachers and parents and community members. And so I think it helped kind of open that door. And so now it's really, now the moment, I guess the door's been open. So now it takes everyone to keep working at it.
Right.
And money is great, but I think there's a lot that you can keep doing without the big dollars, so
Right.
to speak.
Yep.
So now it's just, what do you keep doing with the momentum that Lilly has provided?
Well, I too want to recognize Lily and thank them for their vision, but I know that vision was created by you and a few others, but
Sure.
but that wasn't going to happen without you kind of pushing that envelope and saying this is a need, and a need that we need to focus on. The problem with grants is those are non-sustainable dollars, and schools get started with something and it turns out to be a great program, and then the dollars go away, and then it's up to the school district to continue to fund that. And so sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. That's the unfortunate part about a grant. That's one of the initiatives that we're seeing here in the state of Indiana. Are there other initiatives that you're seeing in other states throughout the nation, perhaps, that you'd like to comment on that maybe we could replicate in Indiana?
Not that, it's interesting that so many of my colleagues around the state were so jealous when they heard about the Lilly Initiative. So it was like the first time that, because California had a pretty big education initiative that got some interest around school counseling about a year and a half ago. But Lilly, that's when all my colleagues were like, what's happening? How did you get this to happen? So it was like our state had this new interest. And I was able to partner with some of my school counselor educators across the nation on this initiative. I just got an email over the weekend around college readiness called Civic Nation. And so I think there's some funding that I was asked to maybe identify some key schools around the Indianapolis area to support students in high poverty schools and students that have high minority populations, to help with college going rates and FAFSA completion. So it sounds like there might be some funding opportunities that are maybe going to trickle into our state. So I'm going to investigate that more. That has been something that's been primarily, I think, in the eastern states. So as I hear about these things, and it was kind of a fun email to receive. So I don't know a lot about that, but I'm going to investigate that a little bit more. But I would say that the Lilly Initiative got a lot of buzz. Especially when we have a pretty significant school counseling conference once a year. And our state bombarded that conference last year in San Diego, California. So we had over 120 Indiana educators in attendance, and it definitely caught the attention of a lot of people around the nation of what's happening in Indiana.
Right.
And I will say it was fun. It was fun to finally, talk around what's happening in Indiana.
Sure. Yeah, good.
So now I think it's the outcomes. I think that's we're gonna see in 4 years if the money made a difference in the Indiana schools and the school counseling programs.
Yeah. Well, again, I want to thank you for all of your efforts with that. And in the Butler program, I'm sure that of the 120 students or the professionals that were in attendance at that conference, many of them were your graduates and from your cohort. But you've been instrumental in so many things in school counseling and other areas as it relates to that. What are some of the major legislative things that you have seen, and what would you like to see in the future as it relates to school counseling?
So, I mean, one of the recent pieces of legislation that we're still working on, currently have a call actually this coming Wednesday, is the House Bill 1430 around the suicide policy work and then the training. And so there's a small group of us that are still working on the model policy in collaboration with the Department of Education. And that's a great piece of legislation. I think I'm hoping that even though the policy does say training educators in grades 5 through 12, my hope is that schools will go ahead and train all of the educators, K through 12, because even though I think it surprises many people that students younger than grades 5 might think about or even attempt suicide, it does happen. And so I would encourage schools that if you're bringing in someone to train your educators in grades 5, just go ahead and train all your educators. That would be my encouragement today. So I think that was a really important piece of legislation, and I do encourage schools to take a really close look at the model policy when the Department of Education does post that, and to really look at their policy and make the appropriate changes to the policy, and then to educate all of the key stakeholders, because there's unfortunately our state's numbers still are not going down in that suicide statistics. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of great people working on the Zero Suicide Youth initiative in our state, but it's still an area to continuously address. So that's one significant piece of legislation I think that is really important with the mental health needs and what we're learning still about trauma and youth in our schools.
Right. Unfortunately, at the federal level, a lot of the mental health funding was cut, and at least from my perspective, we are reaping the benefits, and they're negative benefits, as a result of people needing mental health counseling, and they really have a limited number of places to turn to, and not just in school counseling, but just private mental health agencies. And we have a lot of issues that I think point to that, and suicide being one, and I'm not qualified to make any comments on some of the other things that are happening in our country that are very disturbing to me, but I think we need to have an additional focus on mental health and getting people that maybe don't have the resources, get those resources to them and help them with their mental health issues.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that it's a systemic issue, and you know, it's difficult because typically if a child is in need, my hunch is there's a parent or guardian that's probably also in need.
Right.
And so it's easy to make an assumption that maybe mom or dad or grandma, grandpa, or aunt or uncle is going to be there to help support that child, but that person that's supposed to be supporting that child may also be in need. And so, there's definitely a huge concern in that area. And I know that one of my conversations just last week is there's not enough beds for inpatient care for our youth. And so many people are having to go hours away, and that's not best practice. So if you have a youth that needs to be inpatient and they need a family member to come visit them, that's not often ideal. So if you think of those transportation needs and people that obviously may not have transportation, there's just a lot of concerns that I think hopefully we can look at from a much larger scope that I have access to. But we have a lot of bigger mental health needs for not just our youth population, but our adult population as well.
We've had a breakdown in the family unit, and when you have a breakdown of the family unit, that just has a domino effect in relationship to children and their needs. It may lead them into poverty because people lose jobs, and then that poverty leads them into other courses of action that they may not want to get into, including crime and mental health issues, in order to kill the pain of the mental health, and it leads to drug addiction.
Right.
And then it goes on and on and on. And certainly, as I think, as a country, we have a responsibility to help people with those kinds of issues. And you have a big voice on a national stage, so I appreciate that. And I know it is more focused on school counseling, but our school counselors and the focus that you're providing as a professor they're helping a lot of kids, and so we really appreciate that. So my thanks to you. Any particular advice that you would have for school counselors or those contemplating getting into school counseling?
I think that what we were just talking about is exactly why people go into the field. It's because they have a passion and a love for kids, and they don't go into the field to do anything but help kids. And typically everyone has a story, and the story that they get into this field is because of somebody that's touched their life, and it's either their own personal story or a story of a loved one. And I think that that's why it's frustrating when they get into the field and then they're not able to do the work that they were trained to do.
Sure.
And so I think that everything that we're talking about is why we need to really address why we need more school counselors.
Right.
So I'm not a big fan of talking about ratios because I think it's more than a certain ratio. It's a making sure that every school has the appropriate level of support for the kids that they need.
Right.
Because I think there's certain schools that need, a different level of ratios based on the socioeconomic status or based on the level of need. And some schools have greater parent support and better economic support. So I'm not here to say there's a certain ratio because I don't think it's a one size fits all. But I think that, people get into this field because they want to help, just because I think every educator gets into the field because they love kids.
Right.
And so I think my advice would be don't let the media sometimes or the talk around education keep you from doing this work.
Right.
I think that's the most important thing is to make sure that you follow through and that these kids truly do need someone to advocate for them, support them, and to show up, because I think sometimes that they don't feel like anyone else is there to support them.
Right. I agree with you. And certainly if there's anyone that feels like that these home and societal issues don't have an impact on academic achievement, there's a direct correlation.
Absolutely.
I mean, if they're worried about things that are going on in home or violence in the home or drug abuse in the home, that's a much greater concern than how well they're doing on a particular spelling test or something else. So there is a close correlation. So again, thank you for your work and advocacy for school counselors. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about in relationship to school counseling in your program?
Well, I think that really just not necessarily just in our program, but I think in general that school counseling just sometimes just gets a little misrepresented. I think that there's a misunderstanding of what school counselors do or don't do. And I think that the best thing you can do is just ask. So if you're not really sure what your school counselor does, don't be afraid to ask the school counselor, and go in and have a conversation with your son or daughter's school counselor. Ask them for their resources, talk to them. And I think that there's sometimes a confusion between social work and school counseling. And I think that that's understandable. Sometimes that we're helpers. We're both in very much a student helping role. So I understand why there's a difference. And I think that we both definitely collaborate, but we have different training. And I think that that's something to consider. Social workers and school counselors have very different training, and we have hopefully different places in school systems.
Sure.
And so school counselors are trained as educators, licensed as educators. And so I think that that's something, to be thinking about. So I think that, the best thing that we can keep doing is to advocate and to hopefully be leaders in the school buildings. And I'm going to keep encouraging school counselors to collaborate with their, building level leaders and teachers, and to not silo themselves, and to keep working towards demonstrating their effectiveness, because I think that sometimes they give up too easily, and that doesn't help our profession one bit either. So that's probably some of the biggest things. We have our school counseling conference next week, so really excited about that. One of my dear friends and somebody that I used to serve on a national organization with is coming as a keynote speaker, so I'm excited to see her. And Lily's coming to have a special event because we are honoring over 100 Gold Star schools. So that's exciting. And
is that counseling or the conference going to be here in Indianapolis?
Yeah, it's at the Indianapolis Marriott East Hotel.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's this week. It's this Thursday and Friday. It's November already, so sorry. So yeah, this Thursday and Friday.
Okay.
So that's so we have quite a few Indiana school counselors will come in, and So it's a great time to gather and reconnect, and I get to see a lot of Butler School Counseling alumni, so it's always a fun week for me too.
That is exciting. Yeah. Absolutely exciting. On a little personal story, just to kind of lead you down this path, when I became a school principal, I had particular feelings about what I felt like my counselor should be doing. And, I had a relatively large middle school and one counselor, and for her to be able to get around everywhere that she needed to be was impossible. But she was doing paperwork, and I said, "You're not here to do paperwork. You're here to be working with children and families." The look on her face was absolutely, I can still see it today, was like, "You really want me to be a school counselor?" And I said, "Yeah, that's why you're here, is to work with families and children in need, and the work that you do with them is going to improve our school." And she was so elated and relieved that she wasn't going to be shuffling papers and doing schedules and those kinds of things. Now, granted, somebody else had to do that, but I wanted her working with kids and families. And so I think a lot of it has to do with the philosophy of the leader in a building and an understanding of the role. And I don't know how we get over that hump, because there's so much that needs to be done in a school building. But I really wanted my school counselor working with kids and doing what she was trained to do.
But that was great that you took the initiative. But I think sometimes school counselors need to be willing to take that initiative too. Mm-hmm. That if the building level leader has a different view of their school counselor, they need to be willing to have a conversation. And I'm not sure that definitely takes place all the time. So at that San Diego conference, it was great that Dr. Jill J., our EPPSP coordinator, was able to attend with a couple other, actually, Dr. Moran, the superintendent, and is it Crawfordsville?
North Montgomery.
Thank you. Saying he's North Montgomery.
Right.
So we had so it was a great collaboration, and we had this great debrief. And I think what I want to make sure comes out of this is, I think school counselors also need to learn how to best approach sometimes building level leaders. And because Dr. J was there, and of course no one knew what her role was, and so she got to listen. And I think sometimes we're too quick to assume that we're the only busy people. And school counselors are really busy. I mean, I had a 620 ratio. That was my caseload. I was busy. It was hard, but my building level leader was busy too. And I respected that. I had an assistant principal and a principal that I worked with, and we were a great team. But she was sitting and listening and heard a lot of, my principal did this and my principal did that. And so we came back and we had this really great debrief session. And she said, maybe there's a conversation about how to approach your school principal. And I said, yeah, that's a really good point. And so I think sometimes we all need to sit down and be able to learn how to have great conversations together and difficult conversations together. And I think that's a learning moment for me. Was we definitely sometimes do get too comfortable thinking about what's not working,
right,
rather than being solution focused and thinking about how do I maybe go to my building level leader and say, this is a possible solution. And where that's great that you went to your school counselor and said, this is what I want you to do. That doesn't always happen.
Sure.
And so how do you turn the tables if that's a situation that you need to go and have that conversation in a very positive, again, solution-focused way?
Yeah.
So we have some great progress made, but we still have a lot of progress to make.
I think with the focus on the Lilly Grant and these schools working together with the focus on school counseling is really going to enlighten some school administrators.
Yeah.
And so maybe that light will, and I think you mentioned it that way earlier, that light will shine a little bit brighter on school counseling and the role of the school counselor.
Yeah, I hope so. I think there's been some great trainings, and I think there's hopefully some more trainings that we can provide. I think it's getting just people at the table and having those conversations and learning, I didn't know that was part of your role. And
right.
I think that's what we've learned is hopefully, I know Dr. J and I are hoping to have collaborative courses, a 6-week where our students come together and do a shared data project together, a school change project. And I think that that will be very enlightening for our students to sit together and work as future principals and future school counselors on a school change project. So I think there's some good things that can happen in our training programs and bringing our students together, but also then out in the field, how can we do similar things and bringing principals and school counselors together? Because I think there's still a lot to learn. We've made, again, some great progress, but I still think we have some good things to do. Another area that you maybe think about is maybe improving our school counselor evaluation tool. I still think that that's an area that some schools have done a really excellent job of evaluating their school counselors, and others still evaluate in the role of a teacher. It's a really basic tool. And if you're someone that doesn't really understand the role of a school counselor, it's hard to evaluate if you don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. So I think that that's an area that I know we've talked about, addressing. So,
well, the Butler Principal Preparation Program is another one. Great program at Butler University. The College of Education produces some of the best teachers in the state of Indiana. So just time and time again, we're seeing Butler shine the light on so many things and so many areas of need in producing high-quality folks that are working in the field of education. So my thanks to everybody at Butler for what you do for our students in the state of Indiana. So Dr. Oliver, I'd like to thank you for being on our program today and being on this edition of Indiana Education Insight. Now it's time to wrap up this episode with my take on the current state of affairs in Indiana education landscape.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
Unfortunately, though, we have so much research about the fact that Indiana and all states are facing teacher shortages. Just like we need a commitment to high-quality public schools and educators, we need to make an investment in high-quality teacher preparation programs for our public schools. It also appears that the Federal Department of Education is focused on privatizing schools with more charter schools and in increasing the amount of vouchers in private and parochial schools, as well as creating tax credits for the wealthy to continue the assault on public schools. It is my hope we can get our legislators and our state leaders to see the value of public schools and the nexus of promoting public schools and economic development in Hoosier communities. I see this as an investment in our children and in our state, not as an expenditure. Perhaps we can pursue this issue and others in another segment of Indiana Education Insight. On our next show, November 13th, we welcome Mrs. Donna Petraeus, Executive Director for the Indiana School Public Relations Association. Perhaps she can provide some additional insight into the State House and education. Join us for that and more on the next Insight into Indiana Education. Thanks for being part of education, and please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.